Will you please state your name for the record and begin your testimony?
Hi, my name is Tatiana Turdal. I'm part of the Ukrainian American community in Oregon. I've lived in our state for 20 years now. Ukrainian is now number 5 most spoken language, non-English language in Multnomah and Clackamas counties. So last year, part of the voters' pamphlet for the election was actually translated into Ukrainian in Multnomah and Clackamas counties because of that. So we have a large Ukrainian population, and unfortunately, because of the war, it is growing. So I want to tell you briefly about Holodomor. Holodomor is the famine genocide of 1932-1933 that caused the deaths of at least 5 million Ukrainians. It is really hard to know the number, so estimates have ranged from 3 million to 10 million because, again, information was suppressed. There was no data collected, partly to minimize the impact of this mass starvation. In June 1933, at the height of Holodomor, some 28,000 people were dying daily from starvation. So our community would have this bountiful meal on Thanksgiving, and then 2 days later on Saturday, we would remember people who were starved to death. So what's happening now is there is another genocide in Ukraine, and in the Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine, all knowledge, all books on Holodomor are again banned. So there were journalists who traveled around Ukraine and tried to report on the scale of starvation. But their information was suppressed because there were several well-known Western journalists based in Moscow who basically reported Soviet propaganda and maligned the journalists who tried to report from Ukraine-affected areas. So one of the most notorious journalists was Walter Duranty at the New York Times, who was based in Moscow. And in exchange for access to Stalin and interviews of Stalin and Soviet leadership, basically reported whatever the Soviet leadership wanted. Senator Wagner mentioned Anne Applebaum, who wrote a book on Gulag. She also wrote a book on Holodomor called Red Famine. She tried to, looking at newspaper articles, looking at interviews and memories of the diplomats who were based in Ukraine at the time, tried to figure out why Walter Duranty was reporting this information. Was there money involved? Was he paid for that? But it looked like he just wanted to be known as the expert on the Soviet Union. He wanted access to Soviet leadership, basically for career purposes. But so in private, he would tell a British diplomat that as many as 10 million people may have died directly from the lack of food, but publicly in the articles published in the New York Times and then carried internationally, he would write that the excellent harvest about to be gathered shows the reports of a famine in Russia are exaggerated and propaganda. So he was also awarded Pulitzer Prize for his reporting in 1932, and so far the Pulitzer Board has refused to rescind it. So, so this was an example of fake news, propaganda that suppressed reporting from, for example, Welsh journalist Gareth Jones, who tried to report the news of what's actually was happening.